Today, I'd like to talk to you about White Star by James Thayer. It is a novel about a retired American sniper who winds up enmeshed in this cat and mouse game with an old enemy that he isn't even aware exists, and it threatens the life of himself and everyone that he cares about. I ordered this as a used book online to do a buddy read with a friend of mine, and then wound up getting an art copy, which was kind of funny. So I'm not entirely sure that the version I have is the final printed version, but it should be close enough that the story is the same, and there might be just a few semantic differences or grammatical differences in some of the sentences that I'm going to read later. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that right up front so that everybody understood, like, if they can't find the exact wording that I'm using when I read some of these sections out, that's probably why. The story is solid, the suspense is gripping, and I was fully invested by page 20. I even left a note for myself saying, you know, basically, something happens and he gets the outcome of a court case, and I was so excited or anticipatory about hearing the result of the court, and then I found that I got this swell of emotion when the verdict was read. So I think that it's interesting that he was able to get me invested that fast. The main character in this book, Owen Gray, gets put through absolute hell in the best possible way. And it is done in such a way that by the time you start really ramping up, by the time you get to this sort of sniper versus sniper situation, you genuinely don't know if he's going to succeed. And even if he does, you aren't sure he's going to survive. And you don't know until you actually get to the page where the end is. So I really enjoyed and appreciated how suspenseful the suspense was and how invested you become in these characters. So if you're here for the book review, that's it. It's fantastic. If you like suspense, it is well worth the read. Highly recommend. Go and read it. What I really want to do is talk about this book from craft perspective. So if you're not a writer or you don't care about writing books, this next section is probably not for you. My review of White Star is, yes, that's it. That's all I got. It's great. But I'd like to talk about it from a character development perspective specifically, because I feel like this author does such a great job at characterizations. His characters are rich, they are complex, they're multifaceted, they're multi-layered, and they're not, it's not done arbitrarily to make them complex. They simply are by nature of the way that they're written. He's not thrown in quirks to make them more interesting. They are interesting because of who they are as people. You genuinely believe that these are real people because they're so well written. So I want to go over some of some examples of how he's done that, and then talk about maybe how I think that worked or why I think that worked. But again, if you're not in it for the writing stuff, the previous part was for you. This part's for the writers. Before we get started talking about what makes White Star's characters so effective, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Things like this really help me out, and they also train the YouTube algorithm to give you more of what you want, so more bookish content. So helps you, helps me, easy to do. Also, we have a Discord. You're more than welcome to hop over there and chat with us about books or writing or just life in general, if that's your thing. Okay, so let's talk about what makes James Thayer's characters in White Star so incredibly effective. And one of the first things is his descriptions. So the way he uses language and the precision with which he selects words to describe situations, scenes, and characters. And let me give you a few examples of that. She winked at him, a slow, lascivious welder's torch of a wink. And then later, describing the same woman, he says, she looked alluringly undone when she's standing on a porch in a bathrobe with her hair all tousled. So, alluringly undone, it's not she's unkempt, it's not she's sloppy, she's alluringly undone. There's a casualness to it, there's an exposure, there's a vulnerability to it in a way that tells you a lot about the way that the one character is perceiving the other. So we're not just getting a description of what she looks like, we're also getting the feeling of what the other person is perceiving her as. And I just think that that's so incredibly powerful. Here's another one. 80-hour work weeks had worn him shiny. you can see what that feels like. You know what that feels like, that level of exhaustion to the point that you just are completely smooth. There's no emotion left. You're just plumb worn out, and you've got nothing left. We all know what that feels like, and it evokes images of a coin that's been worn on one edge, or something like that. It's such an evocative image, and I love the way that this author chooses to describe things. He uses phrases like bleeding sunset, or describes the grays in a woman's hair as shooting stars. And all of that sounds really over the top and purple, but it isn't in context, because the rest of the book is so straightforward and so gritty and so grounded. When you get these really vivid, really colorful descriptions, they really pop. They really stand out. So it's not just that he uses this beautiful, colorful, descriptive language, it is that it is embedded in gritty, grounded language. It is unique, and so it stands out. So those are some of his basic descriptions. That gives you a general idea of the way that he uses words. So let's look at the way that he describes characters. Ellison was indifferent to food, and had always been thin, but lately his rib cage had begun to show, and the tendons and veins on the backs of his hands looked like road maps. You know exactly what that looks like, and you get a feel for the rest of the character and the rest of his body, the rest of his frame, the rest of his physique, just by that description of his hands. So here's another one. Here he's describing Detective Coates, which is one of the main characters in the book. He had tiny features, pinprick eyes and a splinter of a nose, so small that his head appeared to have swollen around his face. His hair was a dun color and was short as a drill instructor's. His chest had the dimensions of an oil drum, and his coat sleeves were 2 inches too short. He wore a sagging gray suit. His blue-rimmed spectacles were surprisingly stylish, given the sprung and faded look to the rest of them. Now let's look at this description in more detail. His suit is described as sagging, his coat sleeves too short. His hair is described as dun, which is a nondescript brownish color that's unremarkable. We get the impression that the detective is a little sloppy, but that's contrasted with the sharpness of his drill instructor haircut, his surprisingly stylish glasses. So he's a man of contrast, of opposing aesthetics. Right away, you get the impression that this character is more complex than he appears at first glance. And they're all like that. These characters are rich and complex, and the author uses the complexity of their description to give you insight to their character. Yes, the detective at first comes across as sort of frumpy and worn down and wrung out, and then you start to realize there is a sharpness to him, there is a cleverness to him, there is he has a unique and very distilled ability to observe things and pick things out and pick out details. And that comes across in his character, but we're introduced to it first by the way that he is described. Another thing that White Star does really masterfully is evoke your sympathy as a reader by getting you to relate or root for the main character. So here's how I think he's done that. The main character, Owen Gray, is sort of middle-aged, probably late 40s, early 50s. He's a retired military guy, and he works his frustration off from his job in the district attorney's office, working out in a boxing gym. And he and Detective Coates are buds, and they go to this gym together. And one of the younger guys invites him to spar, basically wants to warm up with him. And because of the way that Owen Gray has been described, up to this point, we get the impression that he's sort of this almost like mythical character. He's a big guy, he's in good shape, he's strong, he's athletic, he's clever, he's good looking, and he's setting it up so that even if we know, we can kind of see that the author is setting him up, so maybe he's not going to win, but he's going to get a few good punches in, and you can sort of see that coming, but that's not what happens. Owen Gray gets whomped. He gets his ass kicked by this young kid. He gets beat down so badly that Coates has to help him off the mat and get to the showers because he can't make it on his own. He really gets his bell rung. And that right there sort of breaks the tension with the character, and he goes from this action movie superstar sort of feeling to real human with real feelings and real flaws that you can really relate to, just like that. Him getting his butt kicked in the gym was the first sign that Owen Gray is a person, a real human being that you could actually talk to and actually relate to. And it turns him into this sort of dogged underdog character that you cannot help but root for. And he does this kind of thing over and over. Every 2 steps forward that Owen Gray takes, he winds up getting shoved a step back. He tries to flirt with a woman, she brushes him off. He tries to climb a lookout tower to get a better view so he can determine how safe they are, and his best friend gets shot. Every time this man makes progress, he gets his teeth kicked in. And it's not to the point that there are no wins, because there are, but his wins come not because he's Johnny Superstar action hero, but because he is persistent, because he is relentless. He's not tired, he's exhausted, but he pushes through anyway. And it portrays him as this shockingly masculine character, in a way that is extremely appealing, in the best sense. It's just phenomenally done. And everything that happens to him, every misstep, every stumble, every fall, makes him that much more likable, makes you root for him that much harder. So I just think that it was remarkably well done, that we all know as authors that you have to let your characters fail. Most of us are not willing to let them fail to the extent that Owen Gray is allowed to fail. We don't usually let them get kicked around the way that Owen Gray gets kicked around. And then when we do, it can feel very sort of grimdark, very gray. And this doesn't feel like that. This just feels like the guy's just had a real bad shake of bad luck. And you know he's gonna pull through because he refuses to not pull through. And when he gives up, when he's had enough, when he's finished, your heart breaks for him, because you've watched him struggle and watched him try and watched him persist even through it all. And it's just so well done. Another thing that I think was done really well in this book was the romance. Now, this is a suspense book. Romance is not a prevalent plot. I would say it's like a side plot. It's certainly not prevalent, but it is sort of peppered in this slow interest, this slow growing camaraderie between the main character Owen Gray and this FBI woman, Adrienne Wade, who is sent in because of what's happening around Owen, because this other sniper is sort of targeting everybody near him. And he fails with her so miserably at first, and she just runs circles around him. I love the way that this author writes women, and I love the way that he writes the way that men perceive women. It feels very real to my experience with the world, to my interaction with the world. Adrienne Wade is soft and strong. She is a powerhouse but vulnerable. She's steely and implacable, but also can be flustered in the right circumstance and by the right person. She's remarkable, and he recognizes that. And when she walks into a room, she commands the room with her presence, not just with the fact that she's pretty, although she is. That's not what it is. It's really her self-possession. It's her confidence. It's her balls. She's just a ballsy woman. And the main character is not intimidated by that. He doesn't need to soften her or make her more feminine. She's already plenty soft and plenty feminine on her own in her steeliness. And he sees it and he recognizes it and appreciates it and is drawn to it. And I just love that. I really enjoyed watching them sort of navigate around each other and slowly sort of come circling towards one another and tighten that circle a little bit at a time. And I just think that it was phenomenally well done. There is a beauty in the subtlety of the difference between the way that Adrian Wade interacts with Detective Coates and with Owen Gray. And the sort of friendly, joking, very companion, very peer, very camaraderie way that she interacts with the detective versus the almost like the tension and the subtext and the subtlety with which she interacts with Owen. And there's too many passages for me to go through and read them all to you. But if you're looking for an example of a way to write a subtle, slow building interest as a romantic side plot, White Star does it phenomenally well. It's not ridiculous. It's not over the top. There's no big passionate swells of music. It's very precise and very, very subtle. And I think that that's why it worked for me so well. So yeah, I think White Star's description and characterizations and the way that he builds characters and how deep and complex they are, I think that this book is worth reading, even if you're not into suspense, from a craft perspective for writers, because I just think he did such a good job. So that's all I've got for this one. If you like this kind of content and you find this sort of thing helpful, or when I find cool examples of things that authors do well, if you like going over that with me and sort of experiencing that with me, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell button if you want notifications for when I upload videos. I try to upload once a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, but I try to do it once a week. And sometimes it's writer stuff, and sometimes it's just, hey, I read this book, this is what I thought. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I am enjoying this writing journey and learning how all of this works with you. So yeah, thanks for coming along for the ride. I'll see you next time.